The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Coaches Clinic, a collaboration between FSU Coach and USYS. My name is Dr. Tim Baghurst. I'm the director of FSU Coach. And this afternoon's guest is Dr. Missy Price. She is the VP of Women's Soccer for United Soccer Leagues. Missy, thank you so much for joining us. Rather than me spend a lot of time introducing yourself, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and just get on with what you have to say.
Awesome. Thank you. Tim, can you just confirm that you can hear me okay?
Yep. Hear you good. Thanks.
All right. Awesome. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this. Reaching out to the USL and asking for us to join in and share ideas and be part of this is really fantastic. So thank you for having me. What I want to talk about today is kind of this merge of when we talk about player development, sometimes depending on the frame or lens at which we all look at the world, that phrase means one thing, 2 things, holistic things like you heard in the video. It can mean a lot of different things to people. And I like to frame player development as human development. If we're coaches and we're focused on developing people, then when we are teaching the tactics and the techniques and all these other things that we're trying to accomplish, making sure that we're also staying very player-centric, very person-centric, and looking at the bigger pictures. How are we equipping our young people with the skills and qualities and sort of motivations and objectives in life to be better when they're young adults, when they're older adults, when they're coaches, when they're parents, whatever they decide to do in their lives. And so that's the goal of today, is to share a little bit of my sort of philosophy on player development as human development. And my goal is for you to walk away with some sort of insights, some ideas, things that inspire you. I try to keep it pretty practical as far as how you're going to be able to not just take away from here some content, but some things you can actually do today with your team if you've got something going on. So let me kind of just give you a little bit of background on me. So I'm currently the vice president of women's soccer at United Soccer League. So the USL has been committed to establishing a pathway for girls and women in sport. You can see that on the right-hand side. So the Super League will be a professional league launching in April of 2023. The W League is a pre-professional league, or think of it as amateur, where players are not being paid. And that starts this May. And then there'll be academy leagues developing. So kind of a pathway. And I was really committed to the idea of helping grow the women's game. And I'm an advocate for women in coaching and women in our sport. And this became a really great sort of next career step after I left Wellesley College, where I was a college coach. Most of my career has been at Division I and most recently at Wellesley. So as a college soccer coach, I've worked in the youth game as a coaching educator. I've coached youth teams. I've worked at the ODP level. I've gone in as a coach. I've also gone in as a sports psychology consultant. And that's kind of been my sort of uniqueness to my career, in that I have a PhD in sports psychology, but I also sort of made a career out of coaching. But my investment's always been in giving back to the game. I was recently president of United Soccer Coaches, and I also a pretty active member of an organization called We Coach, which is trying to develop women in coaching across all sports and all levels. So this is near and dear to my heart as far as being able to share information with other coaches and other important stakeholders in the game so that we can continue to grow the game, both for the players and the coaches. And I think that's something you'll take away today from me. So what I want you to do right now is just hopefully have a piece of paper nearby. If you don't, you want to use your phone, or if you don't want to write it down at all, just think in your head. I want you to kind of start off today with what are coping skills that are going to help you thrive on and off the field. So I want you to actually do this from the perspective of what do you think your players need? So on the field, what kind of coping skills are going to help them thrive? Just give you about 30 seconds to sort of write down a list, think of a list in your head. I'm not going to ask you to, share in a chat or do anything. This is more so for some self-reflection. And there's no right or wrong answers. It's really based on your own experiences. So what skills do you think your players need to thrive on the field? And then just kind of, draw a line in the sand in your brain, one side or the other on your piece of paper, however you feel like doing it, and create a list of what skills you think players need for off the field. So again, I want you to try to think coping skills here. How you define that, totally up to you. What kind of things do players need to help them cope? All right, so what are we going to do with this? What I want you to do is keep that list either active in your mind or somewhere visible. As we go through today, I want to see if anything that I talk about kind of relates to things on your list and how you might be able to use that idea towards something on your list, or just in general, what kinds of things am I saying that sort of align with that, or where maybe do you have ideas that are different than mine? Because I think this helps frame our own learning experience as we kind of engage with one another today. So hopefully on that list, you found things that, if you kind of look through it or think about it, that are active, that are telling what your players actually need to do. Some of them might be values related. Some of them may be very sort of cognitive. Others may be emotional. Again, no right or wrong answers. It's really kind of the frame. And the players you work with may be different than the players that I work with and someone else works with. But hopefully we're going to find some overlap. All right, so where are we going from here? I'm a really big believer in the idea of self-awareness. To become the best version of yourself that you can be, you can create a better world around yourself. So even like one of the reasons I worked at Wellesley College is their overall mission is to make a difference in the world and to equip the women that attend the college to go out and make a difference in their world. We're not all going to be a Madeleine Albright or something like that, but we can make a difference in our own community, in our own family structures, in our own sort of cultural network, whatever that may be. And in order to be the best version of yourself, you have to have a certain level of self-awareness. And we can start teaching that to kids at a very young age. Just being aware of how they're feeling in that moment, what they're thinking in that moment is the beginnings of self-awareness. And those kind of things become even more complex as we get older and have different life experiences. So to frame what we're talking about today, I just wanted to use a theoretical framework. And we talk about sort of intrinsic motivation or motivation in general. And what I did to frame this whole talk is it's not going to be super researchy, but it is based in the concepts of self-determination theory. And it's a pretty big, pretty well-known theory of motivation. There's many sort of components to it. This is not a exhaustive presentation on self-determination theory. It's kind of really simplifying it to what I think makes the most sense when we're talking about motivation, young people today, and being a coach. And what's great is that you can use this theory not only to help you with your players, but to help you as a coach yourself. So what you're looking at is these three main components, and competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And really it just means that we want to feel like we have the skills to be effective, that we feel connected towards others, and that we feel like we have a choice over what we're doing. You could think of anything in your life right now. And if one of those things is out of balance, you don't always feel motivated to do it. You don't feel maybe confident speaking in public, so you sort of tend to shy away from it. But you like going to conferences and connecting with people and choosing what you want to engage in, but you don't necessarily be the one in front of the group, let's say. Just a simple example. So when we talk about sort of this idea of how do I stay the most motivated, And when you think about motivation, it's the intensity and direction of your effort, what you decide to do. You're going to see satisfaction, growth, well-being. Think of all these positive outcomes is kind of like where you get the overlap of all of those things. And that's for that sweet spot that we're looking for right there in the middle, is if we can connect with our players in ways that foster competence, relatedness, and autonomy without using those big words and without making it seem very, manipulated. We want it to feel natural. Then we're really going to help them stay motivated. And we're also along the way going to teach them some skills to foster motivation, even in tough times, even in the ups and downs of life. So this is going to be the theory that we're using to kind of frame all the ideas today. What you're going to see are things related to these three big topics, and ideas about how we can do better at fostering them with our athletes. So again, we're talking about player development as human development. And what we also tend to see is like life tends to appear like the left-hand side of that slide. Something happens and we react. You could think of a number of examples in life or on the soccer field, right? You get a player on your team gets beat by a forward on the opposing team, and that player looks instantaneously like upset or frustrated with themselves, right? Or something like that, if you want to put a negative spin on it. You could also look at that from the positive, in that something happens, that player, flip it, is a forward who beats one of the defenders and pulls a move they've been working on, and they're ecstatic, and you see the smile on your face. And then it appears that it's just like this happens and then that. But really what is in between there and how it really is how we perceive those things. And so I perceived in the first example, right, my player perceives that getting beat by the best forward on the other team, they think that's a bad thing, or they think they've done a bad thing, or they think that everyone is looking at them, or they think that they're not good enough. And that creates the reaction or the feelings. Vice versa, you beat the player, you're proud, you're thinking about how you had worked on that skill. And in that moment, you're feeling excited and you're showing that elation with a smile on your face. There's always a thought in there, even though it feels really fast and automatic, our brain works that way. And so we really talk about the power of our thoughts. And that might not be mind blowing to you, right? You know the things you say. If I say like, don't think of a pink elephant, you might have just saw a pink elephant pop up in your head, because our brain, can really turn our thoughts into exactly what we're telling ourselves in those moments. And so when we think about the way that we communicate with ourselves and we want to develop confidence, here's the first thing that we're thinking about when we talk about player development as human development. Confidence is the key to all of it. In almost every theory of motivation, there's a confidence or competence component. However you break those things down, we have to believe that we can do it, or we don't do it, and we don't try, or we're not going to be curious. And so what we want to focus on when we talk about motivation and player development and human development is how awesome if we can teach our players at a young age that confidence is an inside job, that it's a state of mind, it's a self-belief. Now, we know developmentally, and I'm not going to get into this that much, but we know that young people, right, they are going to really look towards their adult mentors. They're going to look to cause and effect for confidence. They're going to look to really the outcome-based things for confidence. Then self-comparison isn't really something that happens at a young age, but as we develop, our self-comparison can be strengthened. And so as we go through stages of development and looking at sort of just comparing ourselves to outward things or standards, to really kind of getting into those teenage years, and we're trying to figure everything out, and there's a lot of peer comparison, right, to becoming a little bit more self-reliant and understanding that, am I better than I was yesterday? Not, am I always better than someone else, right? But we can start developing that at a young age if we start helping young people think about buffering their identity and buffering their sense of self. And we don't have to make it complicated. So the waves at the bottom of this slide, they sort of represent the different colors. They sort of represent the different parts of who we are. And that we can be influenced by all sorts of things. And nothing's going to be steady, and nothing's going to be a straight line of improvement. But there's variability in there. And at times, something that we might be very good at, a certain skill set on the soccer field, or we might be very good at interacting with our teammates, but not at other things. And so sometimes we're going to be buffered by certain aspects of who we are as a player when the other things aren't going so well, right? And in a single practice, that could change a lot. So at the beginning, someone's not very good at all the technical skill development, but they're really good at reading the game. During that practice, they might feel less confident during the technical skill stuff. And that's where you as a coach, knowing your players, come in and give the right kind of feedback and help with their self-talk. So that's kind of, I want you to think about examples of that and look back at that coping skills list that you have and see if we can come up with some things as I kind of take you through this, okay? So you may or may not have heard of self-talk, but it's essentially, right, the messages that we say in our own head. So the first strategy for confidence, or this first strategy for human development as player development, is mastering our self-talk. So here's a couple things that you can do with yourself and with your players. So one is I am and I will be. You could have them list one thing every day for 2 weeks and answer each of these statements, right? And then they share that list with you, or they share it with a teammate. And what would be really great is even if you found a way to post that where everyone can see it, because it creates buy-in and commitment from people. And you can do this with kids at a really young age. And it doesn't always have to be a soccer-specific answer. It could be something related to talking more at practice. It could be something related to doing their homework before they go to soccer. It could be anything like that. So I am going to do this, or I am this, and I will be that. So getting them to think of now and how now what they're doing can help them be better in the future at something too. So that's a great one to do, and you can use it kind of like at any age. And again, you can use it with yourself. Motivational mantras are great. Think of short statements or things that players could say. So I gave you one example. I'm a dangerous forward because I'm fast, creative, and I love beating the opponent. If you notice that that list is active, it describes things about myself, and it has, like I said, action or activeness to it. So I am a dangerous forward because I'm fast could be where someone starts, because that's what they feel most confident with. And that's their mantra. Or it's, you add in the creative, or I love beating the opponent, or again, anything they want. And this becomes part of their mantra. This is a way to create that positive self-talk. So when they have a mistake on the field, they repeat their mantra. Right before practice, they repeat their mantra. You know what their mantra is so that you can help fuel that. You can add strengths to a list, or add something to the mantra. Like you could say, all right, you come up with one and I'll come up with one. So maybe the player says, I'm a dangerous forward because I'm fast. And you're like, hey, hang on, you're also creative. Again, these mantras help buffer our confidence and remind us of what we're good at, because we're all really good at figuring out what we're not so good at. So how do you coach for confidence? I want you to kind of look at the do column and the don't column. Again, you might be like saying, like, Missy, no kidding, these seem pretty obvious, but we don't always do a good job of remembering to do these things on a daily basis, or we do it when it's easy, or we do it with the players who we know can handle it. And what I'm here to say is that you can do it with everyone, right? So making sure that you're giving praise and instruction, you're modeling, you're watching, you're asking good questions and wondering why. Because I think that's a good way to engage players in order to have good self-talk, and that we catch them doing good, right? Telling is probably the thing we're most guilty of as coaches. Telling them how to do it because we don't feel like we have time for them to figure it out, right? Or ignoring things because we don't want them to feel like we are constantly calling them out for things that are incorrect. And so we just don't know what to say in those moments. So really focus on the left-hand column in order to develop confidence in your players. The thing that I would also point out is the one of care and support. Some coaches this is more natural to them, and other coaches really have to work at this. And depending on the age group that you coach, but asking a player how they're doing today, listening to the things that they say. Maybe someone says that they're telling a story about an art project or something that they did in school. Even just saying to them, hey, I remember hearing you say you had an art project last week. How did that go? And you don't need a high expectations for answers. They could just say it went really well. Thanks, coach. Or they could just say, oh, it was good. And you might not think that that landed with like a big hit, but it did because you remembered and you listened. And that idea of showing that you care and support about them outside of soccer develops them with a stronger relationship to you as player and coach, but allows them to feel more like a person and not just all coach cares about is my soccer skills. And that will be more staying power for their motivation. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. All right, the next thing is we want players that are resilient. So how can you be resilient? Getting up when you're down. We want people who are resilient. You know, coaching in the college game, I would say this is the skill that I've been in the college game for about 20 years until I took this job at the USL. And I would say this is the most variable skill, coping skill for all of the players, and one that has changed in what it looks like over time. And it's also changed in how players learn it. And I'll try to give you some examples of that. But, you know, I think generations ago, the way to be resilient was just to be gritty, in the sense of like, just get through it, just be tough, just have this mental toughness. But people didn't really know always how to do that. But now being resilient is a little bit more than just being mentally tough, because resilience is really about being able to respond, not just react to certain situations. So what is it? It's bouncing back and learning. So if I just respond all the time without thinking about how those responses are affecting me or what's going on in myself or why did I act those certain ways, I never learn anything from them. So that's more of a reaction, right? So if I just react when things become stressful, I don't ever actually learn how to cope with it or deal with it. Responding differently helps me with that. Resilience, you're going to have different behaviors, thoughts, actions, but what's great about it, and something that people, I think, sort of maybe don't buy into, is anyone can learn and develop resilience. You know, even the greatest athletes out there, it's you always hear about their successes, right? You don't ever hear about the things that didn't go so well for them. You know, you don't hear about, you know, being that I recently moved from Boston to Tampa, and I keep following Tom Brady, apparently. You don't hear about all the passes that Tom Brady doesn't make or the mistakes that he made. You hear about all of the ways that he's come back, all of the ways that he's been resilient. And what I think is really important is being able to learn from, like, how did he actually do that? Not just that he did it or that he's just that good, right? I don't know that it just comes easy to him if I bump into him and ask him, but I don't think it, you know, it's always something that comes easy to people, but it's perceived in the public eye as it was easy. So now you have these professional athletes where it appears easy to them, and these youth players looking up to them. Hey, why not help teach them that it isn't always easy? And here's some ways for them to be resilient. And for you as a coach, resiliency may be something that you're good at. Life maybe has really challenged you that way, or that you could also use some help with too. So these strategies can be helpful in both ways. So one of the age-old sayings, I think, when we talk about resiliency is stretching yourself outside your comfort zone. So this diagram you're seeing it's not mine. It's from positive psychology, but it's a little bit more of an understanding of that comfort zone. So a lot of times you see sort of this image of like, here's your comfort zone, and anywhere outside of that is where you're going to grow. But it feels really scary sometimes to step outside that comfort zone. Or we as coaches just say to our players, let's go, get outside your comfort zone. But we don't really tell them how to do it. So I think this diagram really helps us understand that. So if you can think right now of an example of a time that you asked your team or a player to stretch themselves outside their comfort zone with a skill, with fitness, with a interpersonal interaction, anything is fair game. And then look at the circles of this diagram. So when we're in our comfort zone, we feel safe and in control. And if you remember, motivation has this idea of choice in it, which is a little bit like control. So it can feel a little demotivating or unmotivating, or like, maybe I don't want to do this if I'm going to step outside my comfort zone, outside of places where I feel in control. And so right on the edge of that is fear. If you've ever had players sort of say like, well, I don't think I can do that, or they find excuses for why they can't do things, they're still in that fear zone. And that can be really affected by other people's opinions, including yours as a coach. So be careful in the words that you're choosing when you're asking them to step outside their comfort zone. We tend to tell people, don't be afraid. Remember, if I tell you don't think of a pink elephant, you probably just thought of a pink elephant. So you don't want to tell them what you don't want them to be. You want to tell them what you want them to do. So there's a lot of things that operate right in that fear zone. But our goal as a coach is to move that player using our techniques of feedback, information, care, and support, creating positive environments to move them through the fear zone and into the learning zone, which then sets them into the growth zone. So you have to be understanding and patient, because the fear zone it's a real thing. Imagine right now if I asked you to do something that you don't think you can do, or that's a little scary. You're going to feel afraid, whether that's psychologically or physically afraid or emotionally, right? So when you're in the learning zone, that's where you start to really acquire new skills. And now if they're curious and can problem solve, things start to move into that growth zone. And once they've acquired a new skill here or there, right, then you're going to be like, well, I can do that. So think if you were teaching a young player about serving a long ball. When they first learn that, it's hard. But as they acquire the new skill of keeping their toe down and their ankle locked and the foot placement needed to be able to strike a longer pass, the plant foot, and they start to figure that out, that's the new skill they've acquired. Now they're getting a little bit more success, and now they can hit that longer ball. When they start, they're just afraid. I'm not strong enough. I'm not big enough. I don't know how to do it. I'm going to kick the ground. That's all the fear zone, right? And those are all excuses and a lack of confidence. So really being able to move them into a place where they can acquire a simple skill that builds on another one and another one, and now they're in the growth zone. The growth zone is so important because that's where the motivation is going to continue. If you look at the things in there, finding a purpose and setting new goals and realizing aspirations, that's motivation. And we're going to talk about how that plays out here towards the end. So how do we reframe stress? Because remember, if we go back to this picture real quick, stress is happening where? It's happening in the fear zone, and it's happening in the learning zone. And hopefully it's feeling a little bit more under control in the growth zone. But stress is part of learning. It's going to be there. So one of the best strategies that you can teach kids at a young age is name it, tame it, and reframe it. Just call it what it is. And we're not great at this as a society. And so this is, I think, a big one of player development is human development. And you as a coach modeling it can be one of the best things. Think about even just with a young team, maybe you're coaching like a U11 team, and you think that you made a mistake with a decision, a type of information that you gave them. Just saying to them, you know what? I am frustrated at myself because I made a bad decision when I gave you the information about what to change at halftime. That can be a great model for them. And then being able to say, so I had to get over that frustration. I took a couple deep breaths and said, I have a game to finish. I have to keep coaching, right? They're hearing you say, oh, it's okay to make mistakes. And sometimes I feel things when that happens, frustrated. I can understand that. And here's what I did to deal with it. Name it, tame it, reframe it is a great strategy to teach these young people, and something that they can carry on into the rest of their life. This is a skill now that you sort of look into mental health and other aspects related to stress and anxiety. This is one of the best sort of tools that mental health professionals are using to help, especially with anxiety, because again, we have those thoughts right in between what happens and what we feel. And when we start to name things, it helps us tame that and have some emotional control. The other thing that really helps with developing resilience is a practice of gratitude. There's a lot of research out there on what doing things like daily gratitude journals and all of that can do for the self. But when I think about coaching, I think about how can we do this on a simple basis. So here's what I call an appreciation list, and it's a great way to kind of interact with your athletes and be able to talk back and forth with them and learn things about them, which helps create that care and support. So, for example, you could do one of these a day for a week, or depending on how often you interact with your athletes, you could do once a week for 5 or 6 weeks. And there's anything that you can come up with here. And it could be something really quick that you ask them to do when you get to practice. And it's like, I'm fortunate because I can come play soccer every day, right? It doesn't have to be sort of some earth-shattering thing. But what it does is allows us to acknowledge the things that we're sort of grateful for in our life, or the things that we are thankful for or that we appreciate. And that's linked to positive psychological outcomes. But again, this also allows connection to build between player and coach, and among people on your team. And I think that's what's really great, because as we go into the next sort of phase of things, you're going to see how important the idea of belonging is for us, right? So how do we coach for resilience? So I gave you a couple strategies, I gave you a couple ideas, but here's what I think it comes in. And I already used the example of model it in the do column, so we're not going to go over that. Goal setting, we're going to touch on here towards the end. But these first two, I think, are really important, is practicing resilience daily. How can you get your athletes to think about being resilient? How can you ask them maybe when they show up at practice to give you an example of how they were resilient that week at school, or to give you an example about how they were resilient in their daily life? And maybe the resilience isn't the word you start with. Maybe it's how they were adaptable. How were they a problem solver in their own life? Like, oh, well, I, forgot my homework. And so I decided to put my homework in my backpack the night before so I wouldn't forget it. That's resilience. That's actually a resilience skill, because you've learned how to deal with failure of forgetting your homework, adjust to that, and come up with a strategy to make it different, which then has more positive emotional responses and outcomes, right? Like, it's going to decrease your stress. So it seems so sort of maybe small in the big picture of things, but it's still really important. It goes in line with the second one of using failure productively. As young people, we're often taught, right, that failure is something that we shouldn't do, and instead framing failure as learning. A lot of this comes, if you've heard of any of the work by Carol Dweck with a growth mindset, this is really the idea of using failure productively is really built into what she has really worked on. And it's the idea that I can take the things that I have failed at, that I have not yet learned, and recognize that that's okay. And if I look at them with the growth mindset, then I can adapt, I can learn, even if those things take time. And so using failure productively is really big. So I want you to kind of shift over then to the next column with me, which is the don't column, and look there, because I think one of the things that we see here is that phrase, get over it. Now, I'm not telling you to sort of like never use that, but I just want you to be a little bit more conscious of when you use it, because getting over it just sort of implies like, let it go, get over it, don't worry about it. And we don't want them to worry about it. But instead of get over it, be like, hey, I can see you're frustrated there, or I can see that is upsetting you, or I know that you made a few mistakes today and you mentioned that to me. Let's stay where we are right now. So keep your feet where they are, which is right here in practice. And then let's talk about that when this activity is over, or in the game, let's talk about it at halftime, rather than just letting it go and never addressing it, because that's a missed opportunity for learning, right? So I talk about that one a little bit because I think sometimes we forget how to really work with our players. We don't want them to stress out about it, so we try to help them let it go when we want to let go of the emotion, but we don't want to let go of the learning. So strategy number 3 is make a plan and work the plan. So we're talking about goals here. And there's a lot of theories out there on goal setting and how they work and how they can be helpful. I sort of framed it for you this way. Think about the processes, the performance, and the outcomes of both personal and soccer goals, and try to keep these simple and very manageable. Because if you're don't have something sort of long-term or end result to work towards, it's sometimes hard to figure out, how am I going to get there? Or why is this important? And so having these three things that sort of step up to one another, you may think of them as short and long-term goals, but to me, that doesn't give them enough quality to what they are. So think of them as process, performance to a specific standard, let's say, and outcome. What's the end result? Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we move on. So I like to call these goal setting ideas, or these plans, my motivational plan. I find that this works a little bit better than just like short and long-term goal setting. So what's the desired outcome? What are the key relationships along the way? What are the speed bumps? Those kinds of things. So this isn't it what, and you're welcome to screenshot this, borrow it, that kind of thing. But I find this really works. And here's two examples. So here's a motivational plan as a coach. Now you can fill this in however you want. I just picked, let's say as a coach, you want to win a championship. Why not say it if that's what you want to do, right? That's the desired outcome, the big goal. What are the key relationships? And you could build these out in more detail. I just gave you a few examples that are going to help you do that. What speed bumps are going to get in the way? Okay. That desired outcome has a purpose. And the purpose is really what's going to drive you. What are the important milestones? So those things are probably more of your short-term goals. What values does this relate to? Because that's going to keep me more motivated. And then what are the solutions to my speed bumps? Okay. Here's an example of an athlete. So maybe the athlete wants to become a leading goal scorer. Maybe they want to learn a certain move. Maybe they want to be better at their shots on goal, whatever it may be. And here's just an example of what that might look like for them to develop this motivational plan. So if you look at it, it has all these things built in. Long-term goals, it's going to have certain milestones or short-term goals. The values and the purpose and the key relationships lead into those ideas behind motivation that we talked about. And there's always going to be speed bumps, and we need solutions. That's what we just talked about, developing resilience. It's all here in one thing, so you don't have to do it in a lot of different places. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is building a go-to team or their personal network. So as human beings, we're social creatures, right? And as we're trying to engage with our players, and if we look at player development as human development, this is an awesome skill. I mean, most of us learn this when we get to, our careers and we're learning how to network and really engage. And when we're younger, it's really about our friendships. But why not teach our players about developing a network around them that's going to support them? So going back to, if you remember my three circles and my model for motivation, right? The one was relatedness. So we've talked about confidence. We've talked about autonomy or choice, and resilience is a big factor in that. And now we're talking about the idea of relatedness. We need one close, meaningful relationship. We need to feel a sense of belonging in order to keep showing up. You've all probably done something where you're like, I'm not going to keep going back to that, I don't know, CrossFit gym or that, sort of volunteer activity, because even though it's meaningful to me, I haven't really connected with people when I go. Okay. So the power of connection in all the research that we've seen is really been powerful. And this is why even when COVID-19 pandemic first happened and we were all sort of at home, you saw all of these positive outcomes of connection go away. Right. And we saw higher incidences of anxiety and depression, and we saw people having trouble regulating their emotions. So connection is really important. Connection can positively impact us in so many ways. And here's just a list of some of the things it can do. These aren't about these are going to make you a better player, soccer player, but these are going to make you a better person. Right. And these are the things that are going to be super helpful to both resilience and confidence. So strategy number 3 is making connections. Now, I gave a list here because I wanted us to think outside of our soccer team for a minute. How do we encourage our players to make meaningful connections on the team and outside of the team if we're going to develop them? And the same goes for you. Sometimes we get wrapped up in our life and everything that we have going on that we don't always find those connections. And so, of course, here's a bunch of different ways. But what I want to sort of point out is find things that make you laugh and bring you joy is one of the ones that we just sort of like take for granted. It's a great place to get to know your players and also to sort of send them out into the world to find other things that do that for them. Because what if they move, or what if something changes? What if they decide they don't like soccer anymore? At least they've found another meaningful group or people to be around. And so making connections is really an important part of all of this. And then what you can find is that maybe there are connections that two players or you as a coach and a player have on the team that are related to something similar. That could be, a spiritual group, that could be a volunteer opportunity as a team to go do some work in your community. Maybe your team wants to focus on doing a random act of kindness as individuals, and then you can share about what you did. I held the door for someone. I carried these groceries. I just did these random acts of kindness. How do you coach for connection? So as we sort of wrap up these last few slides, what I want you to think about is not only, again, what you can be doing for your players, but what you can be doing for yourself. Just checking in and getting to know them as people is one of the biggest things. And I've given some examples all throughout today about how we can do that. Asking what matters to them, giving them a say in their development is huge. Asking your players to engage in something that they want to do each week at practice. You get to pick an activity, or you get to pick a skill we're going to work on each week. Giving them that input is going to be really helpful. And you're also there teaching them about confidence to say what they want to work on. You're teaching them about making connection with one another to agree to work on that. And you're also building a connection with them of like, hey, I care what you have to say. All right. It's only going to happen if you do it. No one else is going to do it for you. So that's basically the don't column. It's pretty simple. All right. So some communication tips. I'm not going to read all of these out to you, but I think it's really important that you think of 3 things if you're going to think of anything. Ask questions, be curious, and be yourself. If you can be those things, you're going to find that you build more connection and you model that those are really great things to be to your players. This last part on this slide is a great way to follow up. So when you're giving information at practice, or when you're talking to them in a team meeting, what did you hear me say? Tell it back to me in your own words. That way you know you're communicating and hearing each other. Or tell me what that means to you. Or what are you going to do to make that happen when they're telling you that say they want to be better at something? So those, I would say, are really 3 key phrases to just keep and constantly keep asking, even if you've asked them before. It's a great way to empower them when you tell them to put it in their own words. And then you also know that what you're saying is getting translated in a different way, most likely, but you know that they're hearing you. And you can pick up on their type of communication, which allows you to connect with them better. All right, coaching is about developing people. We talked about that, including yourself. So this last thing I want to leave you with is what I call a self-analysis. I focus this on player development, but in order for player development, you as a coach need to have a good self-awareness, just as what you're asking them to have. So if you've ever heard of a SWOT analysis, I basically took that concept and built it into something called a self-analysis. What are your strengths? What excuses do you say to yourself? What are your loves and what are your fears? And if you can analyze those different things, it will help bring self-awareness to where you might need to improve as a coach in order to help with your player development and human development of your players, right? So again, that's self-analysis. Basically, what we're looking at here is if you're awake 16 hours a day, 365 days a year, then you have 350 plus thousand little moments to make a huge impact on the people that you work with and for them to make it on you. So just sit in that for a little bit and remember, that shouldn't create pressure. That should create, to me, opportunity. There's so many opportunities for us as coaches to interact on a level, a playing field with our players of that they are people too. And if we approach it from there, try to stay present, stay curious, ask good questions, and help them frame their experiences with confidence and resilience to buffer their motivation and keep them engaged both in soccer and in their life, then we're doing great things for them, and they're going to be better off for having been coached by you. And that's my ultimate goal. I left a little bit of time for questions. So I know I kind of went through some areas fast. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me both on Twitter and Instagram. And that's also my email address.
Well, thank you, Missy. And of course, if you do have questions, just put them in your chat box and we'll get them to her. Missy, I did have one question. It came via email and it said, how do you get young athletes to make self-reflection a part of their daily routine?
I think one of the simplest ways is if you just even went to the dollar store and you were able to give them all a notebook and a pen, and you just started by having you build it into your time that you're with them, and just start with, here's your self-reflection journal, or call it something fun. And just say, all right, I want you to have it in your backpack. And every time you come to practice, I've had players actually where they put it in their cleats, so that they have to pull it out in order to put their cleat on. But I think with kids, depending on what age you're working with, is start with, if you train them twice a week, start with it being the way you end practice or the way that you begin practice, or both. Mm-hmm. So when before that you even, sort of get out there, depending on what your sort of setup is. I know a beginning of practice can be hard, or at the end of practice, all right, everybody come in, just build time into it with your practice. All right, take out your notebooks. What's one thing that you can reflect on today, and you can use some of those phrases that I shared with you in the appreciation list, like that you are grateful for. What's one thing today or one thing this week that you feel like you could have done better? And it could be, they can write anything, and no one's really going to look at it. You're not going to ask them to share, but that starts the process of self-reflection. I would say with the younger the person, the more concrete the question should be. So have it be really specific to what's one interaction with a friend that you thought went, was good this week. Keep it super simple. The older the player is, the more sort of open-ended it could be.
And Kelly also had a comment, said communication with coaches of programs should include the strength coaches, athletic trainer, nutritionist, so everyone is working together for the common cause of the program. Really important to make sure everybody's on the same page.
100%. And I think that's depending on what, level you're working at, what is your communication strategy? So if you're the head coach, and what are your expectations of the people that you're working with? So if you do have all of those staff members working with you, are you expecting them to check in every day with players? What is that? And everyone's going to have their own style. So I think you just have to sit down as a staff and say, my expectation is that we interact with our players in this way. What does that look like for you in your role? Would be a great way to really establish that if I was a head coach and had all of that support staff working with me, for sure. It's huge.
Could you just for a second just hit the stop sharing, and then we can go full size? There we go. Thank you. Another question came in from Belford. Amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing some real big gems. My question is, from a coach's standpoint, why would I care about these things when I'm not being judged by this criteria when it comes to retaining my job or winning games? Sounds like a wonderful Hallmark movie, but is it practical for successful coaching?
I love that. I think that's a really challenging question in our society. And I can see why coaches will struggle with it. I think I can use myself as an example to answer that. Winning didn't happen in sort of like enough in either way. So if the only goal, right, because especially in our sport where I think we have less control over the game of soccer than maybe some other coaches do at other sports. I'm just that's my opinion. I'll put that out there. I think that our ability to just say that we're going to be judged on our wins and losses does not allow for creativity. It doesn't allow for us to actually stay focused on sort of developing people. And I think that's more of a systemic issue. So I know it can be hard. I'm very idyllic when I talk about it, in the sense of, yes, shouldn't it and couldn't it always be this way? So what I would say is having coaches really look at what do they value, and are their values aligning with the way that they're coaching and the expectations of the club, the college, the wherever they're working, and does that work for them? And if it does, then find a way to really invest in this. Because if you look at this from the standpoint of winning and losing, I would tend to think it might translate a little bit differently in your mind. But if you have confident players who can overcome mistakes and stay motivated, they're going to win, and they're going to develop talent. It just might take longer than we all like, or than our boss likes, unfortunately. But I think that those things are going to be correlates of success.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just had one quick question, and then we'll sign off. You went earlier in the presentation, you were talking about coaches and how yelling at a player is not a good thing. And I agree with you. And yet I often hear athletes, well, not often, but I sometimes hear athletes say, well, I like it when my coach screams at me. It motivates me. It kicks me up the butt and I get going. And my response is, well, I shouldn't have to yell at you to do that. There's other ways. Some say they like it. How do you respond to that? Because I didn't when I was an athlete. I hated it. But others say that that's what they need in order to get going. Is it just a case of arousal levels that just need to be raised?
I think it's an individual specific type of thing, because I think when that question's been posed, I'm not a yeller, as you could probably imagine. So when that got posed to me, or when players would say, I just need you to yell at me more, I would actually ask them to give me an example without yelling. Like, what do you mean by that? Can you give me an example of how you were yelled at in the past that worked for you? Because I think the difference sometimes is when coaches raise their voice in enthusiasm or in excitement, or you're being really direct in that moment, versus sort of yelling that's demeaning, that's caustic, that's sarcastic, those kinds of things. An example I can tell you from my most recent team that I coached was, when I asked that question, the player said, during the game, I want to hear you. And I said, okay, like, hear me how? What would you like me to say, do? What does that look like to you and sound like to you? And her response was, when I'm not doing something well enough, I want you to yell it basically across the field. Whereas, another player would totally shy away and be demoralized if I did that. And so I had to then sort of say to her, okay, let's come up with some examples and we'll try them at practice, because I'm like, I don't even really know what you're asking me to do. But she didn't want me to yell like, you suck, or you stink, or what are you doing out there? Not phrases like that. She wanted me to say her name, and then, you need to get back faster, and to be that direct and to yell it in a tone of like urgency and loud, so she heard it, is what she meant. Right. And I'm like, don't you know you need to get back? Because she just beat you. And she's like, but that's where I need you to come in and help motivate me. So it was interesting, because I'm not going to say that, because to me, it was being Captain Obvious. She needed me to say it to help her with her motivation. So I think that's a good example of where communicating that with a player. Now, that might be harder with younger players than with a college player. So I think when you're dealing with the younger ones, you're trying to sort of just not yell Captain Obvious statements or things that are going to sound like you're demoralizing or shaming them, is my best way to sort of answer that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, everybody watching, just a reminder, we're back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central Time. Zach Crawford is from the U.S. Soccer Federation. He'll be talking about ages and stages of development. And then 4 p.m., Hannah Gardner is going to be talking about optimizing exercise prescription. So it should be an interesting one tomorrow. And of course, don't forget, we also have sessions on Wednesday and Thursday. Be sure to subscribe or like wherever you're watching from. Make sure you get notifications. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and Dr. Missy Price, thanks so much for watching.
Thanks, everyone.